This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, well, let me start off with some announcements. This is our 1 year anniversary, or close enough. The kickoff of this work stream was April 6th last year. So round of applause. I think we've made a lot of progress, and we're approaching a version 1 release of the Redfish schema modifications that we require
Congratulations.
for this work stream.
Congratulations for a whole year of finishing this.
I know it seems to move slow and fast at the same time, but like I said, I think we've made great progress, and I'm really looking forward to the Redfish release that makes this all concrete, and then we can move forward from there. Uh, on a somewhat related note, the second announcement is that I am leaving the United States and moving back to Australia on the 19th of April, and I will be continuing with Vertiv, so there shouldn't be much impact to this work stream. The only thing that might happen is that we may have to change the meeting time. So apart from Rolf, how many of you are outside of the United States?
I am too. Yeah, I'm in
Okay.
Spain.
All right. So looking, this is our complicated problem, right? So this is for the next meeting. The next meeting will be in May. The 19th of April meeting I will cancel for two reasons. One, it's the regional summit, and secondly, it's the day I fly back to Australia. So understandably, it'd be quite difficult to run the meeting. So moving forward into May, this is the problem we face, right? So we've got Pacific time, two different European times here, plus Victoria, Australia, Melbourne. So I think looking at this, where are we? So the only doesn't matter what happens, someone gets the short end of the stick. So looking at this, what I think will happen in May is I will maintain the current time slot. Sorry, Rolf, I don't think you'll get the slot back for the other work streams, because I think this here, it's a little bit of a pain for myself, but it maintains the majority of the group in a decent time slot.
So what time will that be for you, Nick?
1 a.m. So it's not too bad, but obviously
Well,
trying to
that's
keep it decent for European hours. We don't really have much choice, because if I go back earlier, it's getting too early for, we're getting to 6 a.m. Pacific time, still early Central time. So I think for the
with the participation being mostly from the US,
yeah
and you being the main driver of the actual content, you're doing a lot. You're doing most of, if not all of the grunt work, right? So I don't think there is a problem with doing it later, so that the European continent is on the late evening, and
hmm
you end up on the early morning, and the US at the end of the day. Would that make
yeah.
sense?
So the what we could do is I obviously want to keep attending the Redfish DSIM task force, which would be at this slot here at 2 p.m. So we could potentially, I don't know, is 9, so that's getting to 10 p.m. your time, Rolf, as this slot here, 3 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, like I said, somebody needs to take the hit on difficult times, and you being the driver of this, I feel that your own sanity is quite relevant in these calls.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm more of a night person though, so 1
well,
a.m. would
it's your
suits.
choice. It's your
Yeah,
choice.
1 a.m. suits me better than 6. So I think for at least for May and summer, I'm going to keep it at the current time slot,
Well,
and we'll
in
see how
that case,
much I suffer.
what we could look at is just to do it 1 hour earlier, so we get the
Okay.
earlier time slot, and then we can try and move around with the other work streams to swap those slots. I think that should be workable.
Okay. So we can
It's
do a little bit of shuffling.
at least it gives you that 1 hour earlier. Um, let me just quickly have a look at the call schedule to see which work streams will be impacted. I believe one of them is the leadership call, and I think that should be doable. Um, hardware management, that's the steering group,
Mm-hmm.
and the immersion requirements. So the immersion requirements is mine. I'm happy to
Yep.
swap with you. I don't mind. And the immersion steering group, we just need to do a quick round with the workstream leads.
Okay. It sounds
If that's
like
some, if that's
we
something you want
can
to do.
investigate that. Swap it to 1
Yeah,
hour earlier.
because all of the calls are either from 7 to 8 or 8 to 9 Pacific time currently.
Yep.
Personally, I don't mind if you move this to a late evening CET. I think there is less participation from Europe compared to the US. I think most of the more relevant uh, engagement comes from the US territory, but I'm not I'm not certain of that. We can look at the overall attendance over the past year to see how that's worked out, but
Okay. Well, we'll finalize it outside of this, but that like I said, I'd really like to keep it nice for the majority of the attendance, which is US and EMEA. At this point, I'm not looking to expand it into Asia Pac attendees, so it'll just be I don't mind taking the hit to keep this moving forward. Okay, so let's look at moving it an hour forward then, Rolf. That would be good.
okay, I'll send an email to the to all the workstream leads to see if there is any resistance.
Resistance is futile.
Exactly, there you go.
All right, very good. So, like I said, the next one will be cancelled, so I'll send out the cancellation, and then that leaves us to our actual topic of the day, which is the profiles. So, thanks to John for the last meeting for jumping in and giving us a interop profiles overview due to my technical issues. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to start looking at what would be a suitable profile for a CDU, and I have brought up the mock-up for a CDU here. So I thought the way that we'd handle this is we'll go through this mock-up and we would specify what's a minimum requirement, what's blue, what's thermal optimized requirement, what's a red high safety requirement, and what's orange, which is suggestions but not yet required. So optional items that you could use to differentiate your CDU, but is not not something that might be technically feasible right now, but it may, like I said, might be useful in the future. Okay, so let's start off with the CDU. Are there any questions before I kick this off? Is everyone familiar enough with what the profiles are before I just dive into this? Okay. All right. So some of these items here are parts of the Redfish standard, and they're required, so we'll just ignore those. So looking at starting off with the first, 3 ID equipment types, they're all mandatory. We can't. It's implicit that we're dealing with CDU. The name is also going to be implicit. So things like looking at firmware version. So what are we saying about something like the firmware version for the CDU and the version which would be more akin to its production version of the hardware, so to speak? So are these minimal? Are they optional? They're obviously not safety related. So what are the thoughts on?
I would say the firmware version, and the manufacturing date there are
Yep.
desired, but probably not required.
Okay, so that would put it into the orange category. Okay. Let me just quickly take these down. So is there any dissent to that assessment? I tend to agree they're nice to have, but they're not critical by any means. All right, moving on to the through stuffs like manufacturer model, serial number, part number. I would suggest that at least the first 3 manufacturer model serial number are minimal, green. And the things like part number and asset tag are probably suggested orange.
Could you copy this whole text document that's here and drop it into Word and then just color it in Word?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do rather than.
And Mick, that's
Me.
that's in the it's in the bundle.
Yeah, I've got that. Let me just go back. You probably won't be able to see it. I'm just jumping into Visual Studio Code, and I'll grab this whole JSON file, and I will put it directly into the document. That's a good idea.
This work in progress Explorer piece is exactly what was in that zip bundle. So there's the full mockup is there, but it's showing it's much easier to navigate on the Explorer. But yeah, for cutting and pasting, grab it there.
There we go. So let me get rid of that. All right. So this should be a little bit easier. So we're going to say these 3 here were orange. Does anyone disagree that these 3 are green or minimal? Was that assent or dissent? Oh, I'll take that as an agreement. Okay, so.
Big question. This is
Yep.
Rich Lappenbush. Is there any
Yes.
way to add a field, or are we just categorizing existing fields here?
This is existing schema, so
But if there's something missing, let us know, because
yeah,
There is
missing.
something missing. You need country of origin.
Okay.
How do we do that? Do we have to go back to Redfish, or can we do that?
We do that. So
Okay, yes, I'd like to nominate country of origin as essential to this schema. Thank you.
Schema. Okay. So can you give us a real life use case? Like what is this for compliance? Like what's the driver? Can you give us a little
for customs compliance, import, export, system integration, declarations, you need to have the country of origin of the product electronically identified and verifiable.
Okay, so from an audit perspective, from the hardware management, you should be able to query it and know its country of origin. It's because clearly it's not a way bill. This is not a way bill item. This is once you're up and running operationally. So, are you expecting that someone would, from an audit perspective, would want that information from the hardware management interface, or is it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me just make a little category up here. So, cooling unit, country of origin. Is there a specific
Just ISO
standard for
3-letter.
country codes, ISO?
Yes, ISO 3
Okay.
letter. I can get you that later if you need it. Just ISO 3, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. That's enough. We can get it from there.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll mark this down, and we can.
Thank you. That's helpful for us to get an easy, quick definition and something we can all get to.
All right. So this is the naming, and that might change. We'll discuss it in the Redfish call this afternoon. Okay. And you would be considering that a minimal, Rich?
Yes, essential.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. It's always good to have new people, new perspectives. Okay, so let me just highlight some of these that are actually part of the schema. We'll give those a different color. We'll just make those running out of colors. Just give them a nice tinge. There we go. So skip past the UUID. The asset tag and the part number. So these two here, are we saying that those are suggested? They're not. Does anyone think those are minimal?
We've had an awful lot of customers that use the asset tag because that's how they do a inventory of everything that's in the data center. So I would say it would be really nice if that was a base requirement. The part number, maybe not.
Okay, so we'll say that one. Is there any? Yeah, I tend to agree with the asset tag one as well. Does anyone have a counter opinion on asset tag?
It really feels like a pretty low level base functionality we should be requiring at this point.
I think you should be doing it to suggest to people that they use it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so status, that's health status, that's going to be minimal. Okay, so then we move on to location. Now, the location is a whole resource on its own with all different types of physical location information, including, postal code, city, address, all kinds of stuff. So this mock-up here is just showing a simple location placement row. It could be more detailed than that or less detailed than that. So there's a whole resource that we could dive into, but let's just start at the start. So is any kind of location information a minimum requirement for the OCP hardware management interface for a CDU? I think it's nice to have, but it's in no way critical to the operation. But if we are talking about asset tag and we are talking about,
Mick, I certainly think it's nice to have, but I kind of feel like this is a topic we should take up to the larger hardware management group, OCP wide, because there's so much flexibility in that object that I'd like us to, since we have a good, around the world kind of set of folks on these calls, I think it would be good for us to do it at OCP wide to say, hey, what's a set of fields out of that huge possibility of stuff, could we, center around and say, hey, here's a good minimal set if you're going to expose this to a user, and then make it possible for them to broadly set this stuff and expect it to work.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll mark it as suggested for now, and I've made a note that we should probably discuss it as a base level profile for all
Yes.
devices that you could import, because if we're going to go down that route, you might as well specify for not just CDUs but all equipment that falls under the
Yeah,
OCP
exactly.
hardware management. Okay, that's a good point. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, then we move on to
So this
yep,
John. So in that case,
yep.
it will comply with the existing baseline. So you can start this, right? So you start this at a decent baseline for all decent equipment,
Yep.
but for
Yeah.
compute storage and network, right, you have baseline. And so after you guys finish this, because I didn't want to influence you in any way, I want to do a comparison between what you guys decide as mandatory and baseline and bring it back to you guys saying, this is how far apart we are, whether you care or not.
Yeah, and it might not be baseline, so to speak, but I might be overloading that terms and saying it's simply a lower level one that is imported or inherited or
Right.
whatever.
It's a matter of which is the proper subset, which is the
Yeah.
proper superset. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. That's also helpful. Thank you, John. All right. So let's move on to connectivity. So for a CDU, we have the primary connections and the secondary connections, or this would potentially stuff coming from the FWS or or a TCS, and then the output TCS. So I think this should be a no-brainer that you are going to require 2 sets of connections, right? So in this particular case, you're going to want to have both these collections present, and with a minimum of 1 connection on either side for a functional CDU. I'm just making some notes, because these are the kind of things that can be enforced by the profile, that you must have this collection and it must have at least 1 entry. Okay. And then we move on to pumps. I mean, pumps is, are we going to say pumps are suggested, or are we going to make pumps thermal optimized? Like what are we thinking about pumps? Is it necessary to have a pumps collection?
I would think the collection is probably all these subsystems. I think it's going to depend on, how complex that subsystem is for the unit, and how much readable data do you have. So I think we probably want to say like these are probably recommended. And then when we get at, I think we can use the profile constructs to say, okay, look, it's recommended you have this. So if you don't have it, fine. But if you do have a pump, well, then here's the things that you got to have, right? So we'll set a minimum baseline that's an if implemented for that, right? So if you can choose not to have anything about your pump, but if you do, then I got to have, make model serial number or whatever, right?
Yeah, so I think what's Jeff's, oh geez, that's a terrible color. Sorry about that. What's Jeff saying is that these all fall into what we classified as a thermal optimized category, which means you don't have to have it on the hardware management interface, but if you do have it, it's exposing more data that could be helpful for thermal optimization. So it's kind of like an optional optional category that could help with management, but it's not necessary for someone to see the health and operational metrics of the CDU. Okay. So it leads us to the summary, which is the environment metrics, which, this is where, if everyone remembers, this is where we had the supply return, temperatures, flow rates, things along those lines. So I'm almost leaning to this being a minimal requirement, and then we go into the environment metrics and we look at which ones of those are then minimal or thermally optimized. We break it down by metric as to what is required for the CDU. But from a perspective of should you have environment metrics full stop for a CDU, I think the answer is yes. You should be able to query the interface and see what the overall operating environment is like for the CDU, like a summary page, so to speak. So does anyone objectively mark this as green and then go in and look at the mock-up for an environmental metrics for the CDU and break it down that way? Okay. Okay, so let's have a look. So if we just quickly switch over to this mock-up for the environment metrics, we can see that, this mock-up, we've got temperature, humidity, power, dew point energy, these kinds of things. So we can look at each one of these separately and define which ones are minimal, thermally optimized, suggested for a CDU. Everyone agree with that plan?
Yes.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, good. I was scared. I was scared when.
I was like, I'm going to help because it's gonna
Yeah,
be
I know. I
hard.
was
Yeah,
scared. I
yeah,
was scared the network had gone out again because there was so much silence. So thank you for
yeah.
the feedback. All right, I'll come back to that. So let's just finish off this main page. The power meter. So this was the intent of this was to again to it's probably suggested. It gives you an idea of the overall power draw of the CDU to do its function. So I would say it's suggested, probably not critical. Leak detection, I would assume that this is some manner of leak detection is a critical function for a CDU. Is that an accurate statement? And this is obviously referring to leak detection built into the unit itself. We're not talking about any other leak detection systems in the room or the adjoining racks or whatever it might be.
Yeah, leak detection is pretty critical.
Easy.
But is it commonly recognized as a critical item to be built into a CDU?
Yes.
I don't know. Yes. Okay.
All right, and then I guess on that, it probably would it fall under critical health and safety, or is it just a minimal?
It's a good question. Usually they're not like. So say for example, if our CDU detects a leak, what it'll do is it'll alert us, but it won't alert us as like a P1. Um, it'll alert us more of as a priority 2 or something like that. But it does, like it does have real world impacts real fast. So
Yeah,
I think it can go. I think it can go either way, to be honest.
I guess from a profile perspective, it has to be there. If it's minimal or health and safety, it has to be there. So it's a moot point. I was just curious. Okay, so sensors. Again, this is a similar line of reasoning as the environment metrics. I would assume that there's going to be at least one sensor. So this link, this resource collection should be present on the profile. But again, we can go into detail on the sensors and then determine if there's any minimal sensors that should be present. So let me make that one green. Is this still relevant, Jeff, or did this go the way of the dodo for now? The discrete ones.
Dodo.
Yeah, easy
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that got casted in the last stuff for purpose built for leak detection. So
Okay, and then controls is along the same line of reasoning as sensors. So I'm going to
yeah, but those will be off on the chassis. But go ahead and mark them here. We'll move them.
yeah. So well, let me ask a question first. So in terms of controls, are we envisioning a minimal set of controls, like i.e., are we going to expose the control mode for a CDU, or is there a scenario where there's no controls exposed on the hardware management for the CDU?
So we will certainly be fleshing this out more over time, as once we get past this first, hump of the kind of monitoring phase of the standard. So we'll certainly have a controls collection, because that's, if you want to expose those, we've got the means for you to do it, but we haven't agreed on the how do you go put those in context and make interoperable pieces and names out of those. So yeah, you will most certainly want to have a control collection, because that's where if you want to expose your valves and other stuff, the knobs you want to turn today, that's where you'll do it. And then later,
Yeah, and that was my question to the rest of the community. Is there going to be a minimum of one control that is exposed on all OCP
question.
CDUs? Yeah. So are we talking green here, or are we talking orange for suggested? Because I can see a scenario where there's no controls exposed on a CDU because it's
I mean, I would
self-contained
think
and
first,
no user shall touch it. But
yeah, I would think for the first profile, I would say those are probably recommended, and kind of following the same crawl, walk, run kind of mentality.
yeah. So does anyone have a contrary opinion about controls? I've marked it as optional, essentially, as suggested, because of the reasoning that Jeff and I just spoke about.
I personally like the optional. Every single new customer, to be honest, it's a fight. Every single one of them, where it's just like, my opinion is, hey, treat this like a thermostat in your house. You set this temperature and you walk away, and they want to fiddle.
Yeah.
So if we could like low key make it
We can make
optional.
do we need a placebo knob?
Yeah, exactly.
I need a set point that does nothing.
Exactly.
We should have had this last week, so we would have had an April Fool's joke to put in.
Yeah, and that, I'll thank you. That aligns with what Jeff and I were saying, and it also allows us a bit more time to flesh out the control policy and some of the more advanced stuff that we're still working on. So
Agreed.
make it optional, and if you want to expose a set point, you can. If you want to expose more than that, you can. But if you
Agreed.
don't want to put any controls, so be it. We're not judging. Okay, now just remind me, Jeff, the links one, or John, the links, is this? I can't remember if that's a mandatory part of the scheme or it's still optional.
It's not, and yeah, I mean, especially with the facility model being kind of, relatively new and not widely implemented yet, I would say that's all going to be.
Yeah, so
Links you use to show the relationship of the CDU to other other resources.
Yeah, that's a good, I'm going to put that directly as a comment so people can understand why we did that. Okay, so that, I think that's definitely falls under the optional suggested bucket. The last two are just schema. So, well, the OData ID is the Redfish copyright. I don't think that it's just a mock-up item that Jeff put in. Okay, so that's good. We've defined the main ones on CDU, so let's dig into the sub-items starting with environment metrics, and I already pulled that up here, so let me grab that from the raw JSON. Where are our environment metrics? There we go. So this is essentially a summary page of the current metrics, like a one-pager for the CDU itself. Okay, so looking at this mock-up, and don't take this as gospel the actual senses or whatever, they could be different. So, for what would you want as a summary page of metrics for a CDU? I would have thought the input, the supply and return temperatures, for example. So we can break this down, and we can have supply return on the primary, supply return on the secondary. Flow rates, like what are we? What's some thoughts on what we should see as a summary metrics page for a CDU?
Ours classically would be, like rack temps and pressures, and then probably pump speed.
So those temps and pressures are measured at the supply and return of the FWS and TCS, for one of a better.
So usually we would have a rack top, like what's the hottest temperature, and then we would probably also have pre and post heat exchange.
Okay.
Well, pre-heat exchange doesn't matter because that's usually generally pretty close to rack top. So post-heat exchange and rack top, and then pressure off the pump would be pretty essential. And then pump speed.
Okay. Let me just put these down for a second. Pump speed. Post heat exchanger. think post heat exchanger seems self-explanatory to me, but what
Hmm.
I'm not familiar with rack top. Pardon the
So
stupid.
that's like after your coolant cools down your servers.
Okay, so
Um,
it's
yeah, it represents the absolute hottest temperature in the system.
so would that normally be the return from the secondary connections?
Um,
Return,
Possibly.
return
I mean,
from
it
the
really
IT
depends
equipment.
on plumbing. Yeah, return
Okay.
from IT. You could also say pre and post heat exchange. Pre heat exchange is going to be really really close. The difference being, like in our systems, we've got multiple racks, multiple like tanks going to a single CDU. So in ours, we measure at the rack top as So say for example, you've got one rack that's got extremely high heat load, and then a couple others that don't. We would like the granularity to be able to see, hey, this one is getting up to 50 C. We need to ramp it up, as opposed to when they all come back and average back together, they average at like 42, which looks good.
So
But the individual rack temperatures you can probably get from the server itself.
Yes and no. Server flow has a lot to do with what CPU, and then also the wattage on the core.
But you also get die temperatures out of the cores, which is probably more
You do.
important than the
yeah,
exit water temperature.
It is.
would
It
they
is. But yeah.
be would they be those kind of granular details be more suited to the sensors collection rather than the just summary, which is what this metrics is more intended to be, a summary. So
Yeah. I
uh,
mean it. Yeah. I mean it depends. Is this where your users are going to hover? Like, and then dial in, because if you don't ever see that your one rack is 50 C, you know, I guess if you have a robust enough alerting, or like threshold set up for your CPU temps, or something like that, then you would probably go in. So yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that a pre and post heat exchange would be sufficient.
okay, and I'm assuming post heat exchanger is the supply to the
Yeah,
IP equipment.
yeah.
Okay, so what we this seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, this seems to be terminology for what, cold plate?
No, this is single phase.
Okay, so it's yeah. So I'm just trying to think. We need like these correspond to the in the terminology we've been talking about here. These correspond to the supply on the secondary and the return on the secondary. So because one of the things we can do with the profiles is you can specify what the names should be.
Hmm.
So instead of having temperature Celsius, we have and I'm not saying this is the right wording, but it could be supply to IT equipment.
Yeah, I mean
Why am I
for
putting IT in anyway? I'm getting confused. Yeah, or it could be secondary supply temperature. So I think the starting point is what we're doing now is defining which ones should be there, and then the naming
mhm.
is secondary. I think pump speed we can probably use that as a standard name. But what I want to make sure is that if we do put names, that they apply for all different CDU scenarios. Like if you're feeding single phase, post heat exchanger and rack top makes sense. But if you're feeding a immersion tank, then that kind of doesn't make sense, does it? Because I guess it still applies because you've got it's coming back from cooling IT equipment, but it's via a tank. So is that still
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I think it's up for debate personally, but like I think like every one of these is gonna have every single one of these systems is gonna have heat exchanger. So if you tie
Yeah.
it to the heat exchanger, then it kind of makes it, you know, makes it agnostic to whatever whatever style. Or
So
you can
yeah,
tie it to IT because they'll all have IT, right? Like so, pre and post IT or whatever you want to call it, to IT from IT. It's still going to be the same thing.
yeah, they're all, like I said, they've all got a heat exchanger. They're all supplying it to some
Hmm.
manner of IT load, whether it's through a tank or through single phase or enclosed
Yeah.
chassis. It goes through something and comes back hotter. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. Okay, so maybe post heat exchanger and pre heat exchanger would be the generic names that we could use.
Okay.
So then I guess we're suggesting that these are, we would be saying that these are minimal for the metrics. Is there any disagreement on that?
What do you mean by minimal?
In that the environment metrics page, which we'd update, it would have minimal to meet the
Uh huh.
OCP profile. It would have post heat exchanger temperature reading, preheat exchanger temperature reading, and a pump speed in, I guess, in percent, more than likely. And that means if you implement an OCP CDU, it must have at least those three
Gotcha.
items.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I don't know who else. What other CD manufacturers are on there, and I don't, try to peep too hard on other people's stuff. So I don't know if they all have a pre and post, but I personally can't imagine uh troubleshooting and trying to figure things out without at least those two sensors. So and then same with a pump and a pump pressure and a pump speed. I mean, you get so much information out of those, those five sensors, those five data points.
Okay. Well, I'm marking them up now, but I'm asking for input and any contrary opinions. Anyone
Are
so
these
far? Yep. Go on.
are these environment metrics, or would
Yes.
these go under a pump
Uh,
object?
well, that's part of the debate. Right now, we're looking at environment metrics. So this is a single status. What's it doing right now? Show me the critical environment metrics. Now, pump pressure, maybe that goes under sensors. I don't know. That's what we're debating right now. Are these critical to get a point in time overview of what your CDU is doing? That's the
Okay.
perspective we're looking at.
Okay, I was just trying to understand if we're duplicating data in different places, sort of a thing.
Well, we are, because you can see the way the schema works here. We've got these data source URI, so it's just referring to a sensor. If you can
Oh, okay, I
see,
understand.
so this is an abstract basically. So it has to be backed by a real sensor, but this is just, like I said, a summary page. So we're going to run out of time today, but next meeting we can look at the sensors themselves and which ones of those are minimal, optional, health and safety, etc. So just let's try and close out the environment metrics today. So just looking at the rest of this mock-up, we look at something like power, which is the power draw for the CDU to encompass pump power and any other auxiliary power draws required to run the CDU. Is this an optional, nice to have? Look at what your power draw is for point in time.
I think for a minimum, I don't think so. Um, for us,
Same.
that would be more of a diagnostic. Like are you trending, pulling more power than you normally do on your pump? It's more of a like a pump health type thing for us. Whereas if
Okay.
you have like a specific power, total power you're looking at multiple things. You're looking at your PDUs, you're looking at your pumps across your multiple pumps, your water, your coolant, all kinds of stuff. So personally, I think that's more of a diagnostic. However, one to possibly consider for the minimums is your incoming water temperature. Um, I'm up I'm up either way on that one. It is an important metric when determining, like your maximum cooling capacity, and also like, hey, customers coming to us and saying, hey, what's the deal? Why can't your system cool? And it's like, well, you're feeding us 40-degree water. So, but I'm up for a debate
So
on that one.
so back to power. So it may not be a requirement from this community, but from the sustainability project, they've asked
Mm.
for the baseline profile to make power utilization mandatory. So you might get a request from sustainability because they have to calculate, whatever their version of PUE is for sustainability.
Okay. Yeah, and that was along a question I was going to ask along those lines is, is it something that customers want so they can just pull the power drawer and then uh, they put it into their DSIM or the BMS or whatever it is, and then they track, the power usage of the CDU. And I don't know.
Yeah,
Right.
this
So
Sustainability is
the
one reason.
so
But
the
there's other reasons.
sustainability group's going to have to figure out what their algorithm is, and then the requirements for where they need to get power metrics will come down, but that may be a while.
uh, this is Rich. I would second that. That's going to happen. That's going to be a requirement.
Yeah, and because along the green grid LC stuff as well, those metrics that have been worked on. So, do not want to filter keys. Just put a comment on there. I've put that as green for now, for the reasons previously mentioned. I think it's gonna come up in the very near future. And along those same lines, I mean, does this make energy green as well?
Yeah, I would like to start pushing that. Well,
Yeah. Okay. So just quickly, let's just 1 minute left. We discussed temperature and we, put that out into the actual points that are required, the post, pre, and maybe the primary. This dew point, Celsius or humidity, are those anything critical to the getting the state of the CDU operation, an environment metric or not? So I will assume that's a no. So I think we could probably remove those from the mock-up, Jeff.
okay.
Okay, so we've hit the end of the hour. So thank you all. That was productive as usual. I'll make a note on these quickly, Jeff, that we should remove them from the mock-up. All right, so let me stop the recording and we'll continue finishing off the sensors and controls for the CDU in the next meeting. Let me just stop the recording.